Hello and welcome to my kitchen. In this video, I'm going to share with you my updated technique of making sourdough bread. Everyone's got a sourdough bread journey and mine hasn't always come out right, but I've learned a few things and now my loaf rises really well. I've got a wonderful texture to my bread, a lovely crust and beautiful holes. So I'm going to share with you the things that I've changed and what I've learned. Let's get cooking. The first thing you need to do is to activate your starter, and I like to use a sports cup like this with a lid so that I can just keep it like this and not very tight. I kind of keep it ajar so that the starter can breathe. So I'm going to take 70 grams of my starter, add 70 grams of water and 70 grams of flour, and a few grams here and there is okay. So I'm going to put my cup on the scale and then start the scale. And my starter has been in the fridge and this is how it looks. So I'm just going to give it a stir. And then I'm going to weigh about 70 grams out. Okay, 76 grams. That's okay. Then I'm going to reset the scale and add 70 grams of water. This is just room temperature water. 72 grams, close enough. Reset the scale, and then I have strong white bread flour here and I'm going to add 70 grams of that. Okay, 72 grams. And then I'm just going to mix it up with the fork and mix it up really well. Make sure there's no lumps in there or anything. Make sure you scrape the sides as well. And then I'm going to clean the fork off as best as I can and put all the flour and starter back in there. Give it another quick mix. And if you want, you can stick a rubber band around the level of the starter so you can see how much it's risen tomorrow morning. There you go. So that's where the level is. I'm going to put the lid on. Now the lid I'll put on tight, but this I'll leave ajar. And now I'm going to put this in a warm place to sit overnight. So I like to put it by my boiler, my water heater, and leave it there overnight. Then in the morning you can see how much your starter has risen and it should look active as well. You can see bubbles on top and it looks like it's really active. If you like, you can do the float test where you just take a teaspoon of the Active Starter and put it in a glass of water, and if it floats, your sourdough starter is ready to go. The next thing to do is to get a bowl. Now you can use a plastic container with a lid, or you can use a glass bowl if you prefer something heavy. But I like to use this container because my lid is very handy for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the Active Sourdough Starter into the bowl. And then mix it with 280 grams of water and 20 grams of salt. Now you can use a little bit less salt if you like. Between 18 to 20 grams is good. Mix that in with your hand, and that is something that I've changed. I've started to mix it with my hands. So mix that in well with your hands. And then add 500 grams of the flour, and I'm using strong white bread flour, which works really well. And again, we're gonna mix that with our hands, and we're gonna mix it in really well and make sure there are no lumps in there. And this beginning dough is much more stiff than my original recipe, and it's much easier to handle as well. So go ahead and mix it up. You can knead it a little bit if you want to at this point. Don't over knead it, but just make sure it's really nice and smooth. And roll it into a ball, and then set it aside in a warm place. And I put that by my water heater, my boiler, and leave it there to rest for 30 minutes. So my first 30-minute timer is done, and this is how the dough looks. Now the next thing we're going to do is the pull and the stretch fold, and we'll do this on the first side. You're going to pull and stretch it over, and then do the opposite side. You're going to pull it, shake it a little bit, fold it over, and then do the other two sides. And then just go ahead and cover it and put it back in a warm place to rest and proof for 30 minutes. Now, as you continue to do this, you'll notice that the texture of the dough, it becomes much more elastic and smooth. So just continue doing that. You'll do this fold 4 times, and then we're going to do the coil fold, and I'll show you how to do that. In the meantime, I'm going to put this to rest for 30 minutes. All right, so this is the last pull and stretch, the 4th one. And my dough feels so nice and elastic now. And then once we've done the folds, we're just gonna flip over the dough ball and let it rest for another 30 minutes. And then we're gonna start doing the coil folds. And I've learned something about that too, so I'm gonna share that with you. All right, so now I'm gonna do a coil fold on this dough. And there's something that I learned by making a mistake with the coil fold. I used to leave a little bit of a gap, not making sure that it's completely folded under to the middle and attached properly, and that led to the center of my dough having a really thin skin there, and sometimes it would burst. So I'm going to show you how to do this. So this time we're going to wet both hands. Okay. Once you've wet both hands, just go ahead and lift up the dough and fold it under, and make sure it's right down to the middle. And then, so you can see that there, it's right down to the middle. Then you're going to lift it up, and the next layer you have to make sure that it's completely folded under so that there's no gap over there. And then do that again. So lift, and then you're going to basically fold this under and fold the other side under, making sure there's no gaps in between. And then we're just going to cover it and let it proof again for 30 minutes. And if you see small bubbles forming on the outer skin of your dough, just give it a small pinch to pop those bubbles. Now I'm almost ready to do my fourth and final coil fold, but before I do that, I need to do some prep work. So number one is to clean off my countertop so that I have plenty of room to shape my dough once it's ready. And I also want to have my container ready to allow my sourdough dough to proof. And I like to use this container, and I use rice flour to dust it because I find rice flour is the best. For some reason it doesn't stick in the bowl. So I already have some rice flour in here from the last time I baked, and I don't wash this. I just kind of dust it with rice flour and store it that way, and it works just fine for me. This is a medium to small container which my brother got for me, and I absolutely love it. And it's because of the shape as well. The shape of this is kind of deep, and when you're buying one of these, you want to look for a deeper container, otherwise your dough will become a pancake. All right, so I've got that ready. I've got my rice flour ready also to dust, and that's all I need. So I'm going to clean off my countertop and get ready to shape my dough. And now I'm getting ready to do my fourth coil fold, but I wanted to show you what the dough looks like if you don't do the coil fold like under and overlapping each other. You get these kind of waves in the dough, and that used to happen to me all the time. So it looks like that did happen a little bit in my last fold, and I'm going to show you. Can you see this little dent in here? That's what happens when you don't do your coil fold properly, and that's what you want to avoid. But because this is my second to last fold in here, it will be okay. But before, all my folds used to look like that, and it's just not good. So I'm just gonna wet my hands and remove the dough onto the counter, and that's where I'm gonna do my fold and let it sit for a while. The thing that I learned, and two of the most important things that I have changed in my sourdough baking are, number one, my dough is a little bit stiffer. Before it was very soft and hard to manage. And the other thing is how I pull and tuck the dough. I used to use one of those scrapers, but I don't use that anymore. I actually do it by hand, and I've watched many YouTube videos on how to pull and tuck, but I don't think they show you well enough what you're actually supposed to do. Because if you shape it really well when you're pulling and tucking, then your skin on top will come out really nice and taut, and your dough, your sourdough loaf at the end will come out really nice and risen. So I'm going to try and show you what you're looking for while you're doing this. All right, so I want to make sure that my hands are wet. My countertop is not dusted. There's no water or anything, but I do want to make sure that the dough doesn't stick to my hands. So I'm just going to slightly moisten my hands. And I'm grabbing the dough and I'm tucking underneath. And that's what you want to do when you're pulling it. So I'm going to put it to the far right-hand corner. And as I pull and tuck, if this is my dough, I am actually going to pull and tuck underneath, and I want to aim for the center as I'm pulling and tucking. And that's what they're not able to show you, is tucking underneath to the center. Okay, so I'm gonna pull it and tuck it into the middle. Pull and tuck into the center as much as possible. And you have to try and make it round as well. Okay, pull and tuck to the center. And I'm by no means a professional baker, but if I learn something, like a new trick, then I'm very happy to share it with you guys. Okay, I'm just gonna let that sit for a minute. Okay, so that's sat there for about a minute or so, and I'm gonna slightly dampen my hands and just do that again. And you don't want to make it so taut that the skin tears, because you can tear it. You just want to make sure that you're pulling and tucking to the center, pulling and tucking to the center as much as possible. And once your dough looks good to you, when the skin on top looks nice and taut, then just go ahead and flour it. So I've got my rice flour here. I'm just going to spread a little bit of rice flour around. Make sure your container has plenty of rice flour in it. And then we're just going to pick it up and put it in here. And this is something I do as well. Then I grab all the little bits and then just kind of, I twist it just to make sure that it's taut still. And you have to hold it there, otherwise it will separate. But essentially when you're tucking to the center, all your dough should make a small hole here, and you just want to kind of pull it together. If you see any holes, just pinch them together and hold it there, and it should stay. There you go, and just make sure that you have flour all around the edges. And then we're just gonna, that little bit opened up there again. We're just gonna dust it with the rice flour. And then I have a kitchen towel here. I'm gonna cover it with kitchen towel. And then what I do with this is I let it proof for 2 hours, again by my water heater. I'm not putting it in the fridge anymore. I just let it sit by my water heater and let it proof. And it puffs up a little bit, but not so much. Overproofing can lead to a flat loaf as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this proof for 2 hours. Now, even though I've put my dough to proof for 2 hours, I've set a timer for 1.5 hours. And that's because in 1.5 hours, I want to start heating up my oven with my Dutch oven in there. And I'm using a 22 centimeter Dutch oven, and it's just very slightly bigger than the Banneton, the container that I'm using to proof my dough. So my dough's been proofing for 1.5 hours, and now I'm gonna get ready to turn my oven on. So I've got my Dutch oven in there, and my temperature is set at 240 degrees Celsius. So I'm gonna let it heat up for at least 30 minutes, and I'm gonna set another timer for 30 minutes. My 30-minute timer is almost up, and before it gets done, I'm getting ready to take out the Dutch oven and put my loaf in. So I have my trivet ready. I've got my oven gloves ready, and I have some flour ready just in case I need to sprinkle some more flour on it. And this is basically a coffee cup with some rice flour in there. And I have my scorer ready. Now, before I used to just hold the blade in my hand, but I did see a YouTube video with a guy who got the coffee stirrer from Starbucks. They have these wooden coffee stirrer sticks like that, and he just put a blade on it, and I started doing that, and it's so cheap to do and it works amazing. So I didn't go ahead and buy a scorer, I just use this and it works amazing. So thank you for that tip, whoever you are. All right, so we have 3 minutes left, and then I'll be taking my hot Dutch oven out of the oven. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you how my proofed dough looks. All right, so this has been proofing for 2 hours. And it's looking good. This is how it should look. It shouldn't be poofed up like this, then it's overproofed. And it's not stuck at the edges either. There's just a finger amount left on the side, which is perfect. All right, so here's my hot Dutch oven, and I'm carefully going to just plonk this in to my Dutch oven. So just tip it over, and then the scoring that I'm gonna do is like a V, but I'm gonna make it sort of circular, and make sure that you score about 1 centimeter or more deep. And I'm gonna put little leaves on it too. Quickly put the lid back on, and in the oven it goes. So this is gonna bake with the lid on at 240 degrees centigrade for 20 minutes, and then we're gonna take the lid off and let it bake for another 20 to 30 minutes until it's got a really nice crust on it. All right, the first 20 minutes are up, and I'm gonna remove the lid. So from here we can see the loaf has a beautiful burst and it's risen really nicely. So we're gonna let this cook for a further 20 to 30 minutes without the lid on, and wait until it's like a really nice deep brown color. So my loaf has been baking for 45 minutes total, 20 minutes with the lid on and 25 minutes with the lid off, and it looks perfect. So I'm just going to tip it out onto a wire rack so that it can cool. Now you can see that it's a beautiful deep golden brown color, and there's a little bit of black charring, which is what you're looking for, and it's got a nice burst on the sides. And if you knock it, you can hear a hollow sound. The next thing to do is to just leave it on the wire rack to cool for between 45 minutes to an hour, because inside it is still cooking. All right, my bread is completely cooled now, and I'm gonna cut it. Can you hear that crust? So holding it upright like this is an easier way to cut the loaf, and it's recommended to cut it into half. And look at that. I can smell the sourdough. It smells so good. And it's actually a little bit warm inside too. And there's really nothing better than hot, fresh bread with some butter. And I love it with salted butter. Really, really nice. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and I hope that the tips and what I've shown you will help you to bake the best sourdough bread that you've baked. If you're having trouble, don't give up, because it is definitely a journey. Trust me, I've made many a bad loaf and I've learned many things on the way, but when my loaf came out this good, I tell you, I was on cloud 9. I was floating on air. I felt so good. So don't give up, and yeah, give this recipe a try. Maybe it will really work for you. I sure hope it does. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you all soon for some more cooking inspiration.